Hello again, Mole fans. This is Matt, back for another episode of The Mole Tracker, where we take a look at the remaining contestants in the Netflix reality series The Mole, track their suspicious behavior, and rank them in order of most likely mole suspects. Today, we will focus on episodes 6 through 8, which Netflix dropped last Friday, October 14th. So if you haven't watched those yet, do that now and come back, or else you're going to be spoiled. If you're new to the channel, be sure to also check out my previous video where I recapped the first 5 episodes. I'll put a link in the description below. But for now, without further ado, let's get right into it. We are down to the final 5 players, but first let's take a look back at the departed eliminated contestants and see if we can learn anything from their mistakes. On the screen, we see a list of the eliminated contestants, along with who they said they suspected going into their final quiz. We do have to be careful here because there is some selective editing that goes on during production. They're not going to show us everything and they don't want to give anything away. Also, as we've seen with other things throughout the season, the editors are not afraid to trick you into thinking one thing when the opposite is true. Case in point, I don't know about you, but I was almost certain that Joy was going to take the second exemption after the big cliffhanger last week, because the trailer and the preview seemed to show the money blowing up in her face. I could have sworn I saw her sitting at the table when the money exploded in the trailer, but obviously that was some creative editing. Nevertheless, when we look at the list of eliminated players, a pattern emerges. Early on in the game, people thought Joy was the mole due to her blatant sabotages, voted for her, and were eliminated. This leads me to believe that Joy is probably not the mole. We also see that Pranav and Greg were on some people's lists, but they're obviously not the mole either, as they've since been eliminated. Avery seems to be at least partially responsible for the elimination of Dom and Pranav, as they each became suspicious of her right before they were eliminated. And the last 2 contestants to be eliminated both moved Jacob up their suspect lists right before their demise. That brings me to Greg, who, if you remember, was my pick last week to win the money, so I definitely got that one wrong. I was very surprised when he got a red screen. But that's part of the fun of guessing the mole and the winner during the season. You're going to be wrong sometimes and have to change course midstream. Production really beat it into our heads over the last couple of episodes that Greg had Kazi on the top of his suspect list for a while. But it seems like he may have switched his pick to Jacob following Joy's outburst at the last minute, which could have contributed to his downfall. Now, a quick word about our new host this season, Alex Wagner. I think she's doing great. She had huge shoes to fill with Anderson Cooper doing the original series, but she combines the right mix of professionalism and silliness. She seems to really enjoy what she's doing. I like what she brings to the show. I'm a big fan. And one of the things I'm curious about, and I hope we find out in the finale, is does she know who the mole is during the gameplay? In the original series with Anderson Cooper, he did not know, and so he was playing along with the group. I think he eventually found out towards the end, or figured it out towards the end. But in the Dutch version, via de Mol, the host knows right from the beginning, and they have open dialogue in their one-on-one sessions, and the host is almost an extension of the producers. So I'll be interested to see if Alex is in the know, or if she's going to be surprised just like the rest of us. Moving on, let's talk about the missions and play a little game of follow the money. I mentioned it in the last video, but the Dutch Mole fans like to add up the money, won and lost by each contestant, to see if they can spot any patterns. So let's give that a try here. The table on the screen shows the money won or forfeited by each of the remaining players in each mission. It's not a perfect system because sometimes other people on the team will be more responsible for either succeeding or failing at the mission, but we're just trying to draw general conclusions here. We see that the data backs up what we suspected. Will has brought in the most money for the pot, followed by Avery and then Jacob, while Joy has contributed the least. However, to Joy's credit, she has recovered the $25,000 she bid away, as promised, by declining the second exemption and then carrying the backpack across the finish line. Meanwhile, Kazi has contributed the second lowest amount to the pot, and that even gives her credit for the $20,000 win in the Spot the Fake mission, where her incorrect vote was overruled by the other players. Without that $20K in her column, Kazi would amazingly be behind Joy, the notorious queen of losing money. Now let's highlight the players that drew the most suspicion during each mission. We see that Joy came out hard with suspicious actions straight from the start, leading to the demise of Osei, Samara, and Dom, as discussed earlier. But Kazi actually has the overall lead in suspicious moments, especially in the recent episodes. So, with all that new information that we've gathered from the last 3 episodes, how does that affect my rankings? Well, not surprisingly, Kazi is still number 1 on my list. This boils down to the old saying, once you see it, you can't unsee it. I had Kazi as number 1 on my list last week, so I was watching her carefully to see if she did anything to change my opinion. And actually, it was quite the opposite. Everything she did in these episodes only solidified my choice. Let's start with the backpacking mission. The logical mole play here is to put the money in your own bag and make sure you don't finish the race. Sure enough, she withdraws immediately and the money is in her bag. Check. Now we go to the lockdown exemption game. Despite her partial sabotage in the backpacking mission, the team had still won $20,000 and was on a bit of a roll at that point. Therefore, the mole had to make sure this mission failed. Ideally, someone else would have taken the exemption first to deflect suspicion away, but alas, the group chose Kazi to go first, basically forcing her to take the exemption and screw the rest of the team. This clearly made her a bit uncomfortable in the moment, but I'm sure she appreciated spending the night in a warm luxury hotel and removing the money from the pot. Then, in the Spot the Fake game, every move she made screamed mole to me. The mole wants to be on the lie detector team because they have the most control over whether the money enters the pot or not, especially since the mole likely knows which story is fake and can try to lead the others astray. The mole also obviously knows which painting is fake because they made it. So whoops, guess that wrong and be sent to the lie detector team. And while you're at it, pat yourself on the back by saying that painting is so great over there it has to be the real one. As an added bonus, you don't have to have a snake wrapped around your neck. You don't have to walk on hot coals or stand up and demonstrate your lying ability to the rest of the group. Sadly, Will and Greg outvoted her, and the team won the mission anyway, but she did all she could to try to screw this one up. Her final sabotage attempt was in the birdcage mission, clearly stalling for time and choosing the wrong pigeon, only to be overruled by Joy in a rock, paper, scissors battle. In this case, she got bailed out by the struggles of the other team, but still was clearly working hard to sabotage that mission. So I know that all sounds pretty definitive, but we do have to be careful of something the Dutch mole fans call tunnel vision. That's when you're so focused on the actions of one player as the mole that you fail to notice the suspicious behavior of the others. With that in mind, let's look at some other dark horse picks as possible moles. Moving up my list this week to number 2 is Avery. Part of me kind of wants it to be her. I think it would be interesting if the mole took on a strategy of immersing themselves in the role of a normal player, even in the confessionals, telling the viewers, hey, I'm going to go out of my way to sabotage here and draw suspicion to myself. Watch. While secretly being the mole. I also sometimes wonder how she made it this far in the game if she has in fact been gunning for Jacob the whole time. I'll be interested to see her reaction if Jacob is the next to go. Speaking of Jacob, he's another dark horse candidate, checking in at number 3 on my list this week. It could be him. He's cost the group plenty of money along the way and has had his share of suspicious moments. But we saw him fail to convince the other players while lying about his story in the Spot the Fake mission. So I think it would have been difficult for him to lie his way through the entire game as mole without being detected by more players. I also expect him to be eliminated immediately when the game resumes, so can't put him too high on my list. Rounding out my list this week are Joy and Will. If either of them are the mole, it would absolutely shock me. So let's just rank them tied for 4th. They're both playing the game very effectively, but very differently. 2 extremes on the opposite sides of the spectrum. Joy with her aggressive, abrasive style, drawing attention to herself and getting other players off their game. Some viewers may not like it, but you have to admit that it has worked to get her very far in the game. And then there's Will, with his positive attitude and winning mentality, pushing others to succeed. Even though none of the eliminated players has suspected him, his history of success throughout the game makes him extremely unlikely to end up as the mole. Last but not least, let's examine some potential clues. First, there's a major clue that may have multiple meanings, and then also a theme that I think may apply to my prime suspect. There's probably plenty other out there for all the remaining players, so if you see any, put them in the comments below and I'd be more than happy to investigate. The first thing we encounter before we even start the first mission is the plane. It also shows up in many promotional photos for the series, like this one seen here. Does it contain a clue? One theory is that the plane points to the pilot, Joy, as being the mole. We certainly get reminded over and over again that Joy is in fact a pilot, so it is certainly a possibility that they designed the first challenge around that plane as a clue. But I think it could have a different meaning. A big shout out to eagle-eyed commenter Neil Fitzgerald for pointing out the Colombian flag on the side of the plane. What could that signify? Neil also noted that Kazi's bio mentions that she attended Columbia University in New York. And sure enough, that checks out. Take a look. In fact, her height is also listed as 6-0, which also matches some of the numbers on the plane. I haven't quite figured out the meaning of the remaining numbers. If you have some thoughts, share them in the comments below. Maybe they point to Will, Jacob, or Avery instead. Let me know your theories. And finally, I noticed Kazi wearing a lot of yellow this season, and it occurred to me that gold could be a theme. When the show opens, the very first person we see is Kazi wearing a gold top. And gold, of course, symbolizes being first. The first mole in the new series, perhaps? There are also references to gold throughout the season, most notably in the bank heist mission, where, as we all remember, Kazi struggled to find the names related to gold. During the season, we often see her wearing a yellow headband and other yellow clothes. So to me, that's the final piece of the puzzle in solidifying my official mole pick. So there you have it. That's my rundown for episodes 6 through 8. I'd like to thank everybody in the mole community for the amazing response to my first video. I think one of the great things about the show The Mole is that it's so interactive and it allows for great audience participation. So I appreciate everybody doing that. It's hard to believe that just 1 week from now, we'll know officially who the identity of the mole is, who was the winner, how much money they took home, and I can't wait to find out. Until then, happy mole hunting and take care, everybody.